The verdant seeker drifted through the empty darkness at the edge of known space, where no living species had traveled in thousands of years. Commander stood at the observation window and watched the dead planet below with all four of his silver eyes. The world had no name in any modern database, and its surface was nothing but gray rock and ancient dust. Yet something down there had sent a signal that reached across the galaxy and brought his ship to this forgotten corner of existence. Turned to face his senior scientist, who was studying the readings on her console with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Had spent her entire career searching for artifacts from the ancient times, and now her hands trembled as she processed what their sensors had found. There was a structure beneath the surface of that dead world, and it was older than anything they had ever discovered. 12,000 years at minimum according to the dating systems, and possibly much older than that. They considered themselves the most advanced civilization in the galaxy, and they had good reason for this belief. Their ships could cross between stars in days, and their technology had brought peace to dozens of species across 1,000 worlds. But the readings from below made all of their achievements seem small and young. Whatever had built that structure possessed knowledge that made science look like the scratching of children in the dirt. Lieutenant entered the command deck with a report in her hands, and her expression told that the news was significant. She was young for her rank with only 2 decades of service, but her mind was sharp, and her instincts were reliable. She handed the report to the commander and waited while he read through the details of what the deep scans had revealed. The structure was vast and extended for kilometers beneath the planet's surface. Most of it had collapsed over but one section remained intact at the very center. Power still flowed through systems that should have failed long ago, and at the heart of that power sat a single chamber containing something that the sensors could not fully identify. It was biological, and it was alive despite all logic suggesting that nothing could survive for so long. Practically begged for permission to lead an expedition to the surface, and could see that refusing her would be pointless. The discovery was too important, and the potential knowledge too valuable to ignore. He gave the order, and within hours, a team of 12 descended through the atmosphere in a shuttle designed for hostile environments. Was among them because wanted eyes he could trust on the ground. She watched through the shuttle windows as they landed near a natural opening in the rock that led down into the ancient structure. The walls inside were made of a metal that their equipment could not identify, and symbols covered every surface in languages that had been dead for longer than they had existed as a species. They walked for nearly an hour through corridors that grew warmer as they descended. Emergency lighting still functioned in some sections, casting a pale blue glow over the alien architecture. Recorded everything with hands that shook from excitement, while the security officers kept their weapons ready for threats that never appeared. Whatever had built this place had not designed it for war. The central chamber was circular and roughly 50 meters across, with a domed ceiling that displayed a map of the galaxy as it had appeared 12,000 years ago. Recognized some of the star patterns, but many of the marked locations no longer existed, having been consumed by stellar events or simply lost to time. At the center of the room sat a pod made of the same unknown metal as the walls, and through its transparent cover they could see the shape of a being inside. Approached the pod with reverence and ran her scanner across its surface, while the rest of the team kept their distance. The being inside appeared humanoid with 2 arms and 2 legs and a single head, but its proportions were different from any species in the galactic database. It was shorter than but broader in the shoulders and chest. Its skin was pale from without sunlight, and its hair was dark and cut short in a practical style. The medical scanner delivered results that made no sense according to everything they knew about biology. Bone density that should have been impossible, muscle tissue that was denser than stone, neural activity that suggested a mind working even in sleep. Whatever this creature was, it had been designed rather than evolved, and whoever had designed it had been very good at their work. Found the warnings first. They were carved into the floor around the pod in dozens of different scripts, and her translation software worked through them one by one. Every single message said the same thing in different languages that spanned across species and across centuries. Do not wake the sleeper. Do not open the chamber. Leave this place and forget what you have found. She reported her findings to who dismissed them as superstition from primitive cultures that had not understood what they were looking at. The senior scientist was already searching for the controls that would open the pod and felt a growing sense of dread that she could not explain. Something about this place felt wrong in a way that went beyond the strangeness of its technology. The debate that followed lasted for hours, with arguments transmitted back to the verdant seeker and then to high command. Some urged caution, and suggested that they should study the pod without opening it. Others argued that the potential rewards were too great and that the warnings were likely just attempts by ancient peoples to protect their secrets. In the end, curiosity, one as it always did with thee and the Order, came down to proceed with awakening. Found the activation sequence hidden in the symbols on the pod's surface, and her fingers traced the pattern that would begin the process. Wanted to stop her, but she had no authority to countermand orders from high command. She could only watch as the ancient machinery hummed to life for the first time in 12,000 years. The pod began to glow with soft light, and the being inside stirred slightly. Frost that had covered the transparent lid began to melt, and systems throughout the entire structure activated in response to the awakening sequence. Felt the floor vibrate beneath her feet as power flowed through conduits that had been dormant since before her species had learned to make fire. The lid of the pod began to rise with a hiss of escaping gas, and the being inside took its first breath in. Saw its chest expand, and its eyes move beneath closed lids. The warnings carved into the floor seemed to grow brighter in her vision, though she knew it was just her imagination responding to her fear. The eyes opened, and they were brown like the soil of living worlds. They focused on with an intelligence that was sharp and clear despite the long sleep. The being looked at her, and then at the others, and then at the room around them. Its expression shifted from confusion to understanding to something that might have been sorrow. It spoke in a language that none of them recognized, but the word it said was clearly a question. When no one answered, it tried again in a different tongue, and then another. On the fifth attempt, it found something close enough to ancient that the translation software could work with it. "Where am I?" asked the being from the pod, "and how long have I been asleep?" Found her voice somehow and answered, "You are on a dead world at the edge of known space. According to our measurements, you have been in that pod for approximately 12,000 years. The being closed its eyes and saw pain cross its features. When it opened them again, there was a weight in its gaze that she did not understand. "Something has gone very wrong," it said. "If my pod has been opened, then the emergency protocols have been triggered." It paused and looked at each of them in turn, "which means the galaxy is in danger again." The being from the pod sat on the edge of the medical bed aboard the Verdant Seeker and allowed the doctors to run their tests. His name was Cole, and he had offered it freely when asked, though he seemed surprised that they did not already know it. The way he said human when describing his species carried the weight of something that had once been important and was now forgotten. Medical officer stood at a respectful distance and watched the data flow across her screens with growing disbelief. Everything about the human what she knew about biology. His bones were 3 times denser than any species in the galactic records, and his muscle fibers were arranged in patterns that maximized both strength and speed. His heart beat at a steady rhythm that never varied regardless of stress, and his brain activity suggested that he was processing information at rates that her equipment struggled to measure. Cole answered their questions with patience, though his eyes often drifted to the viewport, where the stars moved slowly past. He told them that he was a soldier from a time when humanity spread across the galaxy. He told them that his people had been protectors who stood between the darkness and everyone else. He told them that something had happened that forced humanity to hide and to sleep and to wait for a day that he had hoped would never come. The crew watched him with a mixture of fear and fascination that he seemed to notice but not acknowledge. He moved through the ship like a ghost from another age, and everything he did reminded them of how small their civilization was compared to what had come before. When he walked the corridors, he mapped them in his mind without effort. When he observed their technology, he understood it within moments despite having never seen it before. When he spoke their language, he improved with every sentence until his accent was nearly perfect. Lieutenant had been assigned to monitor him, and she found herself drawn to the strange being despite her training telling her to maintain professional distance. There was a loneliness in Cole that she recognized, though she could not explain why. He was the last of his kind as far as he knew, and everything he had ever loved was 12,000 years dead. She asked him about humanity one evening when the ship was quiet and most of the crew was resting. Cole looked at her for a long moment before answering, and she saw him weighing how much truth she could handle. He told her that humans had not evolved naturally like other species. They had been shaped over generations by deliberate design, with each generation stronger and faster and smarter than the one before. They had been made into weapons against an enemy that nothing else could stop. The enemy had a name that translated roughly to the Hollow. Cole spoke it with hatred that burned cold and deep in his voice. The Hollow were not a species in any normal sense. They were a swarm intelligence that consumed all biological matter they encountered and adapted to any threat within moments. They had emerged from the void between galaxies millions of years ago, and they had been feeding on civilizations ever since. Humanity had been engineered specifically to fight them. Human biology was designed to be unpredictable in ways that the Hollow could not adapt to. Human minds could process combat at speeds that overwhelmed the swarm intelligence. Human bodies could generate energy fields that disrupted the Hollow at a cellular level. Humans were the only thing in the known universe that the Hollow had ever learned to fear. Asked what had happened to the rest of humanity, and Cole went silent for a long time before answering. He told her that they had won the war after centuries of fighting. They had driven the Hollow back into the void and sealed the pathways they had used to enter the galaxy. But the cost had been everything. Billions of humans had died, and those who survived were scattered across the stars in hidden places waiting for the enemy to return. He had volunteered for the long sleep because someone had to be ready. Others had done the same across the galaxy in pods hidden on dead worlds and forgotten moons. They had left instructions that the pods should only be opened if the Hollow returned. The fact that his pod had activated meant that somewhere out there the ancient enemy was stirring again. Commander called a meeting of his senior staff to discuss what they had learned. The ancient records that the kept spoke of humans as myths and legends. Stories told to frighten children about beings that could tear through starships with their bare hands. Tales of warriors who could not be killed and who fought with a fury that made gods seem tame. Most had assumed these were exaggerations created by primitive cultures trying to explain natural disasters. The data from the medical scans suggested that the legends might have been understatements. Cole was a living weapon wrapped in flesh and bone. His body was capable of feats that engineers could not replicate with their most advanced technology, and according to his own account, he was not special among his kind. He was simply a soldier doing his duty. Proposed bringing the human to for further study, but shut down the idea immediately. They had no idea what Cole was capable of or how he might react to captivity. More importantly, they had no right to treat a thinking being as a specimen regardless of how valuable his biology might be for research. The decision about what to do next was taken from their hands when a priority transmission arrived from Border Command. An outpost called Listening Station 7 had sent a distress call and then gone silent. Ships sent to investigate had found nothing but debris, and the bodies of the crew had been discovered drained of all biological matter. Something had consumed them completely, leaving only bones and empty shells behind. Cole was present when the report was read aloud, and his reaction told them everything they needed to know. His face went pale and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He asked to see the images from the attack site, and when they were displayed on the screen, he made a sound that was almost a growl. "The Hollow," he said, "they have returned." The bridge crew looked at him with expressions ranging from disbelief to terror, saw something change in Cole at that moment. The quiet sadness that had surrounded him since his awakening burned away and was replaced by something harder and colder. He stood, and his eyes focused with an intensity that made her take an involuntary step backward. He told them that the weapons would not work. He told them that their ships would be eaten and their people would be consumed. He told them that everything they had built would fall unless someone stopped the Hollow before they could establish a foothold in the galaxy. And then he told them that stopping the Hollow was exactly what he had been made to do. Commander asked him what he needed, and Cole gave him a list that was surprisingly short. A shuttle, weapons if available though he did not require them, coordinates for the attack site, and a promise that they would evacuate the nearest populated areas while he bought them time. Watched him prepare, and she saw the transformation complete itself. The lonely survivor was gone, and in his place stood the weapon that humanity had spent generations creating. He moved with purpose now, and every action was efficient and precise. He was not afraid of what was coming. He was looking forward to it. The shuttle launched an hour later, carrying Cole toward a battle that they could not fight, stood at the observation window, and watched it disappear into the darkness between stars. She did not know if she would ever see the human again, but she knew with certainty that she had witnessed something that would change the galaxy forever. The sleeper had awakened, and the Hollow would learn to regret waking him. The ruins of Listening Station 7 floated in the darkness like bones picked clean by predators. Cole guided his shuttle through the debris field and studied the destruction with eyes that had seen this pattern countless times before. The Hollow had not changed their methods in 12,000 years. They were creatures of hunger and efficiency, and they saw no reason to vary their approach when it worked so well. He landed on the largest surviving section of the station and sealed his suit before stepping out into the vacuum. They had given him their best combat armor, but he had left most of it behind knowing that it would only slow him down. He wore a simple pressure suit and carried a plasma rifle that felt like a toy in his hands. The real weapons were built into his body, and no amount of technology could match what his ancestors had given him. The interior of the station was a graveyard. Cole moved through corridors where crew members had died in confusion and terror. Their bodies were hollow shells now, with every drop of organic matter consumed by the swarm. He paused at each one and committed their faces to memory. They deserved to be remembered even if no one else would ever know their names. He found what he was looking for in the central command section. The Hollow always left scouts behind after an attack, small organisms that watched and waited and reported back to the swarm intelligence. They were hiding in the shadows above him, and he could feel their presence like cold fingers against his spine. Cole stood in the center of the room and let them see him. He wanted them to recognize what he was. He wanted them to transmit his image back to whatever controlled them. He wanted the Hollow to know that their ancient enemy had returned. The scouts moved first, as he knew they would. They dropped from the ceiling in a wave of grasping tendrils and snapping jaws. There were dozens of them, and any other being would have been overwhelmed in seconds. Cole was not any other being. He moved through them like wind through grass. His hands found weak points that the Hollow could not adapt because human biology was designed to be unpredictable. His body generated fields of energy that disrupted their cellular structure and caused them to dissolve into dust. He killed them by the handful, and with every death he felt the familiar rhythm of combat settling into his bones. When the last scout fell, he stood in a circle of destruction and allowed himself a moment to breathe. His heart rate had not changed, and his hands were steady. 12,000 years of sleep had not dulled his edge. He was still the weapon his people had made him to be. The shuttle carried him away from the dead station and toward the coordinates that they had identified as a likely gathering point for the Hollow swarm. They had detected strange energy signatures in a system 3 days' travel from the border. Cole suspected that the enemy was building a staging area for their invasion. If he could find it and destroy it, he might buy the galaxy time to prepare. He spent the journey studying the data on the Hollow and comparing it to his own memories. The swarm had not changed in any significant way since the last war. They were still driven by the same hunger, and they still used the same tactics. This was both good and bad. Good because it meant his training was still relevant. Bad because it meant they had not needed to evolve. They had been winning against everything else. The system appeared on his sensors as a dying red star surrounded by barren planets that had never supported life. Perfect territory for the Hollow, who needed only raw matter to consume and did not care about the quality. Cole brought his shuttle into a high orbit around the largest planet and began his scans. What he found made his blood run cold. The swarm was larger than anything he had faced before. Millions of organisms moved across the planet's surface like a living carpet of darkness. At the center of the mass sat something that his training called a genesis node. It was a structure that the Hollow used to produce new organisms at an exponential rate. If it was allowed to mature, it would spawn enough creatures to consume entire sectors of the galaxy. Cole calculated the odds and did not like what he found. A single human against a swarm of this size would normally be suicide, but the Genesis node changed everything. If he could destroy it, the swarm would be crippled. The organisms would still be dangerous, but they would lose their ability to reproduce and adapt. They might actually have a chance to fight them. He set his shuttle on a collision course with the Genesis node and prepared to eject before impact. The explosion would clear a path through the swarm, and he would fight his way to the center on foot. It was a desperate plan with little chance of survival, but desperate plans were all that humans had ever known. The shuttle screamed down through the atmosphere with Cole strapped into the pilot's seat until the last possible moment. He could see the Hollow rising up to meet him, millions of organisms forming into defensive patterns that would have stopped any normal attack. He waited until the impact was inevitable, and then he ejected. The shuttle hit the Genesis node like a hammer from heaven. The explosion was visible from orbit, and the shockwave tore through the gathered swarm like a blade through paper. Cole fell through the chaos with his suit absorbing the heat and his body absorbing the impact when he hit the ground. He rose from the crater he had made and looked around at the devastation. The Genesis node was damaged but not destroyed. He could see it pulsing with sickly light as it tried to repair itself. The swarm was disorganized but not defeated. They were already turning toward him with hunger in their countless eyes. Cole smiled for the first time since he had awakened. This was what he had been made for. This was his purpose and his burden and his gift. He was human, and humans did not run from the darkness. They ran toward it. He charged into the swarm, and the battle began in earnest. His fists crushed organisms that tried to consume him. His feet carried him over ground that writhed with hostile life. His body blazed with energy that turned everything it touched into ash and dust. The Hollow tried to adapt and failed. They threw new forms at him, and he destroyed them all. They attempted to overwhelm him with numbers, and he cut through them like they were nothing. They were the ancient enemy of all life, and he was the answer that the galaxy had created to stop them. He reached the Genesis node after what felt like hours of continuous combat. His suit was torn and his body was bleeding from dozens of wounds, but none of them slowed him down. He placed his hands on the pulsing structure and felt its attempt to consume him. It failed as all Hollow attempts to consume humans failed. His biology was poison to them, and his touch was death. He poured everything he had into the Genesis node and felt it begin to collapse. The structure screamed in a frequency that no normal being could hear, and the swarm around him went into chaos as their connection to the node was severed. Cole pushed harder, and the node exploded in a burst of light that illuminated the entire planet's surface. When the light faded, Cole stood alone in a field of destruction. The swarm was broken. The Genesis node was gone. The invasion had been stopped before it could truly begin. He looked up at the stars and thought about the waiting for news. He thought about and her curious eyes and her genuine desire to understand. He thought about all the species in the galaxy who did not know how close they had come to extinction. Then he collapsed because even humans had their limits. The darkness took him and he did not fight it. He had done what he was made to do. The rest was up to others now. The Verdant Seeker found Cole 3 days later lying unconscious in the center of a dead swarm that covered the planet like a blanket of ash. Was the first one off the shuttle, and she ran to him without thinking about the danger. His body was broken in ways that should have killed any being, but his heart was still beating, and his lungs were still working. He was alive despite everything the universe had thrown at him. Medical officer worked on him for 18 hours straight using every technique she knew and inventing several new ones when the old methods failed. His body was healing itself at a rate that her equipment could barely track. Bones were knitting back together, and tissue was regenerating without any assistance from her treatments. She realized eventually that her role was simply to keep him stable while his biology did the real work. Cole woke on the 4th day, and his first words were a question about the swarm, told him that it was gone. The destruction of the Genesis node had caused a cascade failure throughout the entire organism, and the Hollow had simply died without their organizing intelligence. Scouts were reporting that the immediate threat was over, though everyone knew it was only a temporary victory. Admiral arrived from high command with a fleet of warships and 1,000 questions. He was a veteran officer with decades of experience fighting pirates and insurgents, but nothing in his training had prepared him for what he found on that dead world. The images of the destroyed swarm were being broadcast across the galaxy, and every species with access to communications was asking the same question: what was strong enough to do this? Cole met with the Admiral in a conference room aboard the Verdant Seeker. He was still weak from his wounds, but he insisted on standing because sitting felt wrong when discussing matters of war. He explained what the Hollow were and where they came from and why they would never stop coming. The swarm he had destroyed was a scouting force. The real invasion was still out there somewhere in the void between galaxies. It would come eventually, and when it did, the galaxy needed to be ready. The Admiral asked how they could possibly prepare for an enemy that adapted to any weapon. Cole told him about humanity and about the long war that had nearly destroyed his species. He told him about the genetic engineering and the centuries of selective breeding that had created beings capable of fighting the Hollow. He told him about the sacrifice and the cost and the terrible burden of being designed for a single purpose. He also told him about the other, thousands of them scattered across the galaxy in hidden locations that only humans knew. Each one contained a soldier like Cole. Each one was waiting for the signal that would tell them the enemy had returned. Cole had not sent that signal yet because he was not certain it was the right choice. The Admiral asked why, and Cole took a long time to answer. He said that humans had never wanted to be weapons. They had accepted the role because someone had to, and because they loved the galaxy too much to watch it burn. But 12,000 years was a long time, and perhaps the other species had grown strong enough to fight on their own. Perhaps humanity could finally rest. Spoke up then, though she had no right to address an admiral. She said that she had seen Cole fight, and she knew that no could match him. She said that the galaxy needed humans not because other species were weak, but because some enemies required a specific response. The Hollow could not be stopped by technology or numbers. They could only be stopped by beings who were designed to stop them. Cole looked at her with something like gratitude in his eyes. He had been carrying this weight alone since he awakened, and it helped to know that someone understood even a little. He told the Admiral that he would consider sending the signal, but first he needed to see how the galaxy responded to the knowledge that humans were real. The response came faster than anyone expected. Within days, the galactic communications networks were filled with stories about the human who had destroyed a hollow swarm single-handed. Some species called him a hero, others called him a threat. A few called him a god, though Cole found that idea deeply uncomfortable. Governor Myra of Threshold Station invited him to speak before a gathering of representatives from across the galaxy. Threshold was the largest trade hub in known space, with millions of inhabitants from dozens of species. It was neutral territory where enemies could meet without violence, and where deals were made that shaped the future of civilizations. Cole agreed to attend because he saw an opportunity. If he could convince the galactic powers to work together against the Hollow, then perhaps humanity would not have to fight alone this time. Perhaps the other species could contribute in ways that would make the war survivable for everyone. The journey to Threshold took 2 weeks, and Cole spent most of that time recovering his strength. His body was remarkable, but even it had limits, and the battle with the swarm had pushed him beyond them. Visited him often, and they talked about things that had nothing to do with war. She told him about culture, and he told her about human history. They found common ground in unexpected places, and a friendship began to form between them. The arrival at Threshold was chaotic. News of the human had spread faster than any ship could travel, and the station was packed with beings who wanted to see him for themselves. Security officers cleared a path through the crowds, and Cole walked with his head high, though he felt exposed in a way that combat never made him feel. He was a soldier, not a diplomat, and he was not sure he had the words for what needed to be said. The assembly hall was enormous and filled with representatives from species that Cole had never seen before. Some of them looked at him with hope. Others looked at him with fear. A few looked at him with hunger that reminded him uncomfortably of the Hollow. He stood at the center of the hall and waited for silence to fall. He told them the truth. He told them that the Hollow were coming and that nothing could stop them forever. He told them that humanity had been created to buy the galaxy time, and that the time had been used poorly. 12,000 years of peace, and the galaxy was no better prepared for the darkness than it had been before. He told them that they could change that. They could work together across species and across systems. They could share technology and resources and soldiers. They could build an alliance that would stand against the Hollow when they returned in force. Or they could fight alone and die alone, as so many civilizations had before. The response was mixed. Some representatives stood and pledged their support immediately. Others demanded proof of the threat before committing their resources. A few accused Cole of fabricating the danger to gain power for himself. The debate went on for hours, and Cole stood through all of it, answering questions and deflecting accusations, and trying to plant seeds of cooperation in ground that had been barren for. He was still speaking when the alarms began to sound. The hall fell silent, and every eye turned to the screens that displayed the station's external sensors. Something was approaching Threshold, and it was not friendly. The Hollow had found them. Cole looked at the images on the screen and felt something cold settle in his stomach. This swarm was 10 times larger than the one he had destroyed. It was not a scouting force. It was an army, and it was heading straight for a station filled with millions of innocent people. He turned to the assembly and spoke with a voice that carried across the silent hall. He told them that the debate was over. The enemy was here, and the time for preparation had passed. They could fight together or they could die together, but those were the only options remaining. Then he walked out of the hall and went to find a way to save them all. The swarm descended upon Threshold Station like a wave of darkness that blotted out the stars. Cole watched from the observation deck as the defense fleet opened fire with every weapon they had. Plasma beams and missiles and kinetic rounds tore into the approaching mass and destroyed thousands of hollow organisms with every volley. It was not enough. The swarm adapted within minutes, and the weapons that had been effective became useless. Ships began to fall as the hollow consumed them hull by hull. Admiral stood beside Cole and watched his fleet die with helpless anger in his eyes. He asked if there was anything that could stop them, and Cole told him the truth. The only thing that could stop the hollow was a human. The only way to save the station was to deploy Cole directly into the swarm and hope he could find and destroy whatever was controlling it. The Admiral asked what the chances of survival were, and Cole did not answer because they both knew the number was very close to zero. The swarm outside was larger than anything Cole had faced before. It was led by a swarm leader, which meant the intelligence guiding it was far more sophisticated than a simple Genesis node. Killing it would require getting close, and getting close meant walking through an ocean of creatures that wanted nothing more than to consume him. Found him as he was suiting up in the shuttle bay. She did not try to stop him because she knew it would be pointless. Instead, she asked him why he was doing this. Why was he willing to die for species he had only known for a few weeks? Why did he care what happened to a galaxy that had forgotten his people even existed? Cole stopped what he was doing and looked at her. He told her that humans had never fought because they expected gratitude. They had never sacrificed themselves because they wanted to be remembered. They did what they did because it was right, and because someone had to stand between the darkness and the light. That was what it meant to be human. That was the gift and the curse that his ancestors had given him. He told her something else too. He told her that meeting her had reminded him why humanity had made the choice to protect others. It was not about species or genetics or engineering. It was about connection. It was about looking at another thinking being and seeing something worth saving. She had given him that reminder, and he was grateful for it. Then he sealed his helmet and walked toward the shuttle that would carry him to his death. The flight through the swarm was a nightmare of fire and darkness. Cole piloted manually because automated systems could not react fast enough to the constantly shifting mass of hollow organisms. They struck his shuttle like rain, and he felt the hull begin to buckle under the assault. He pushed the engines harder and aimed for the center of the swarm, where his sensors detected the distinctive signature of a swarm leader. The shuttle gave out a kilometer from his target, and Cole ejected into the void. He fell through space, surrounded by creatures that reached for him with hunger that had no end. His suit protected him for the first few seconds, and then it failed, and he was exposed to the swarm with nothing but his own body to shield him. He did not slow down. He pushed through the mass of organisms with fists and feet and elbows and knees. He generated energy fields that turned everything around him to ash. He moved faster than anything alive should be able to move, and he killed with every motion. The swarm tried to adapt and failed because human biology was the one thing in the universe they could not understand. The swarm leader waited for him at the center of the mass. It was a vast creature that dwarfed Cole 1,000 times over. It was the collected intelligence of millions of organisms shaped into a single form that could think and plan and hate. It looked at Cole with eyes that had witnessed the extinction of countless species, and it spoke to him in a voice that resonated directly in his mind. It told him that he was the last. It told him that humanity was gone and that nothing could save the galaxy from its hunger. It told him that his struggle was meaningless and his death would be forgotten within moments of its occurrence. Cole smiled at it. He told the swarm leader that it was wrong about one thing. He was not the last. There were thousands of humans sleeping across the galaxy waiting for the signal that would wake them. Even if Cole died here today, others would rise to take his place. The Hollow could kill him, but they could never kill what humanity represented. Then he attacked. The battle between Cole and the swarm leader lasted for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Cole was faster and more skilled, but the leader was vast and powerful beyond anything he had faced before. It struck him with limbs that could crush starships, and he dodged by millimeters. It tried to consume him, and he burned his way free from inside its body. It adapted to his attacks, and he changed his approach before it could finish adapting. He took wounds that would have killed him 10 times over. His bones broke and healed and broke again. His blood painted the void around him in streams of red that the swarm consumed eagerly. His vision dimmed and returned and dimmed again as his body struggled to keep his brain supplied with oxygen. In the end, it came down to will. The swarm leader was ancient and patient and certain of its eventual victory. Cole was human, and humans did not know how to give up. He found a weakness in the leader's structure. a point where its distributed intelligence converged into a single node. He drove his fist into that point and poured every remaining scrap of energy in his body into destroying it. The swarm leader screamed in a frequency that shattered sensors across the entire system. Its body began to collapse as the intelligence that held it together died. The swarm around Threshold Station went into chaos as the organizing force that guided them vanished. Ships that had been losing the battle suddenly found their weapons effective again. The tide of the war turned in a single moment. Cole floated in the void surrounded by the dissolving remains of the swarm leader. His body was broken beyond repair, and he knew that this time there would be no recovery. He had given everything, and there was nothing left to give. He closed his eyes and prepared to join his ancestors in whatever waited beyond. They found him 3 hours later drifting in a field of dead hollow matter. His heart had stopped, and his brain showed no activity. Medical officer pronounced him dead on the shuttle ride back to the station. Then his heart started beating again. Cole woke in a medical bay surrounded by beings who looked at him with expressions he could not read. Was there, and she was crying though she tried to hide it. Admiral was there, and his face showed something that might have been respect. Governor was there, and she bowed to Cole when his eyes met hers. They told him that the swarm was destroyed. They told him that the station was saved. They told him that the galaxy was calling him a hero, though he suspected that would not last. Heroes were always loved until they were feared, and humans had always been feared eventually. Told him something else too. The battle had accelerated his cellular decay in ways that could not be reversed. His body was dying at a rate that even human biology could not stop. He had perhaps 6 months left if he was lucky. Cole accepted the news with a calm that surprised everyone except. He had known the price when he chose to fight. He had accepted it because the alternative was unacceptable. 6 months was more than he had expected, and he intended to use every day of it. He sent the signal to the others scattered across the galaxy. He did not know how many would respond or how long it would take for them to wake, but the message was clear. The Hollow had returned. Humanity was needed. The war was beginning again. Then he turned to the work of preparing the galaxy for what was coming. He trained soldiers in tactics that had been developed over centuries of fighting the Hollow. He shared technology that humanity had kept secret for. He built alliances between species that had never trusted each other before. He did everything he could to ensure that when he was gone the fight would continue. Stayed with him through all of it. She became his aide and his friend, and something more that neither of them had words for. She told him that she wanted to understand humans, and he told her that the best way to understand them was to watch what they did when no one was keeping score. They protected others. They sacrificed themselves. They stood against the darkness because it was right. On the last day of his life, Cole sat at a viewport and watched the stars he had spent his existence protecting. Sat beside him and held his hand, though she knew he could not feel it anymore. His body had finally given out, and he was fading faster than anyone could stop. He told her not to build him a memorial. He told her that humans did not fight for monuments or glory. They fought because someone had to, and because the light was worth preserving. He told her to remember that when the other humans woke, they would need friends in the galaxy, and she could be one of them. Then he closed his eyes and let go. Across the galaxy, on a forgotten moon, detected the signal that Cole had sent. Its systems hummed to life for the first time in 12,000 years. The being inside stirred and began the long process of waking. The first human had fallen, but the awakening had only begun.